answering yes. There was a strange smacking sound on the other side of the line.
Ah, there we are. That's two, my girl. Don't you worry. I'll be visiting you real soon to get the last one.
I had dropped the phone with a clatter and ran from the house, but to no avail. I was caught, I was locked in, and I was just watched closer afterward, my family apparently having warmed to the idea of acting as my wardens and preferring it to the embarrassment of public institutions. It was in this trap that I stayed, waiting for him to come, waiting for it to come. For how could such a thing be human? I heard some days after my last phone call that my aunt had taken her own life, but I knew the lie of it. That thing had murdered her and was coming for me next. Except it never came. Years passed, and as time dulled the edge of my fear and trepidations, the banality of my existence made me almost pine for something as strange as whatever the gravekeeper might be. Of course, that was a foolish wish, but it was one that was soon granted. It was my mother this time, asking if I wanted any lunch, and as soon as I answered, I felt the change come over me. It felt as though someone had set fire to my brain. I stumbled back from the threshold of my room and collapsed against my bed, sliding to the floor as the world receded to black. When I awoke, I knew I was ruined, tainted. I could feel him nesting in my mind, in my soul. He didn't take control often, but I could feel him sending out tendrils as he probed my thoughts and feelings. I began to have dark and perverse thoughts, as well as the reoccurring image of a face that was both Meek's and not Meek's, its mouth a red slash full of broken knives, cutting and recutting the long purplish tongue that lolled out of its mouth, wet and hungry. I could feel that mouth in my mind, consuming me bit by bit, replacing me with something else. I could feel that dark tongue roving and questing, burning everything with its acid touch. I could feel it licking the inner chambers of my heart. My mother is dead now, and they've decided I'm to blame. The past 2 weeks have convinced them that I'm evil, possibly possessed. As I don't remember spans of that time, and given what I know, who am I to argue? They mean to bury me and leave this house forever. Though whether that last idea is truly theirs or the bank's, that's another matter. I wish I had it in me to fight them, but I'm too tired. And considering what lives inside me now, perhaps it's the best thing. I always wrote such happy poems. I was embarrassed to have anyone read them because of their optimism and bright view of a world beyond the borders of places like Greenheart Home or my own family. Perhaps the idea that there are good people and good places, places where truth and love and kindness can find light enough to grow tall and strong, is a fantasy. But I don't think so. I just think it's foreclosed to me now. Last night, I woke to find that a new poem had been written. His poem, not mine. It was titled The Magpie Song.
There's a flock of magpies round me. They soar as high as you can see, you see. They took my eyes, but fairly paid, for I rest in their eyes as even trade, spanning the land and the sea. There's a flock of blackbirds in flight. They move to and fro every night. They took my ears, beaks sharp and wry, but it favors me with each sobbing cry, found in the spaces away from the light. There's a flock of crows crying loud. They cast shadows great as a cloud, a shroud. They took my tongue, and so my voice. By then I was strong, they had no choice. It's with their pink darts I taste the tears. There's a sky full of rooks, and it's me. See the remains in the field I used to be. But now I move free, still young and hungry, still reaching out into the void. I see you shining there, your spirit, unaware.
I think he wrote it, at least in part, to mock me, to twist something that I love and show me how he's going to taint every corner of my life, letting me watch until it's all gone. But I've lived a small life. I blame my family for some of that, but I can't lay it all at their door. Perhaps I should have been braver and bolder, stronger. I should have found a way. But it's too late for me now. They mean to bury me tonight. As horrible as that is, I won't fight them. The one benefit of having such a small life is that it's easier to risk it, easier to finally be brave. I'll gladly give my life if I can carry the gravekeeper with me, keep him, it, from touching others. Protect the goodness that I know is out there somewhere in the world. I hear them coming for me now, so I must end this. I will try to hide this on my person as well, as the means to write more if I have the need and the ability. I've just realized what I've been writing this all with. I don't remember this pencil, and I wonder where... It ends there. My mouth was dry, and I felt on the verge of tears, both for Emily and for myself. I felt no closer to a solution, and I could tell Ellison felt the same. We stared at each other for a moment before I asked a question that had been in the back of my mind since I started reading us the rest of the letter. Why do you believe me? Why do you believe any of this? I laid the letter down and sat back. I could just be crazy or a liar. I could have faked this letter, be giving these people bath salts or something. So why are you so willing to believe that the gravekeeper is real? Ellison rubbed his mouth and gave me a wan smile. I'd like to say it's just my gut, my cop's instinct. But my instincts have never been that great, if I'm honest. The real reason is because this isn't the first time I've ever seen a monster. I raised an eyebrow, and he went on. Not this thing. Nothing like this thing, whatever it is. But there was a time when my brother got taken by someone. Something. I was a teenager at the time, and I was stupid. Thought I'd track him down, hunt down whoever took him. Wound up, I was the one being hunted. I got drugged to a place where it had my brother. Turns out I hadn't been too far off, but I was too late. He was torn apart. I saw tears welling in his eyes as he looked away to the wall. Suddenly, this man was there. He killed that thing and saved me. I leaned forward, my eyes wide. How did the man kill it? Maybe that'll help us. He laughed softly.
You'll think I'm lying. But he killed it with a crowbar and an electric drill. When he was done, it was just gone. Disappeared. Before today, it was the most bizarre thing I'd ever seen. And it's still a close second.
I went to ask him something else, but my phone rang. It was Sandra, and she was screaming. I drove behind Deputy Ellison, his patrol car's lights forging us a path as we sped through town and out to the interstate. All we had to go on were 3 words Sandra had said in the middle of her terrified screaming. At Hideaway Lodge. I didn't understand the reference, but Ellison told me Hideaway Lodge was a large motel along the interstate. When I learned it lay somewhere between my town and where Sandra was living with the girls, it made more sense. It also drove home that it might not just be her in jeopardy, but our daughters Alice and Christy as well. Half out of my mind with fear, I was running out of the building when Ellison caught me. You need to take a breath, man. I tried to pull away, but he held me fast. I know, and we're going to get them, but you aren't good to anybody if you kill yourself getting there. Let me help. I shook my head. No cops. I'm going to do what I have to do, and I can't have someone between me and them. I can't let this keep going on. Ellison smiled, his eyes hard but not unfriendly. I'm not talking about cops. I know enough to know this is something special, like when that thing got my brother. I'm not helping you as a deputy. He glanced out the window to the parking lot. Though I'm not above running the sirens to get us there faster. We pulled into the gravel parking lot in a cloud of gray dust, and Ellison was already in the office before I was fully out of my car. I almost followed him in, but held back out of fear that a harried civilian partner would only weaken his authority. In a minute, he was back out and heading toward me. Guy said the 2 men checked in about 2 hours ago. He said there have been other people in the car, but he never got a good look. Then half an hour ago, he saw a patrol car pull up. He pointed down to the corner of the building. That's Minus's patrol car. The motel manager never saw her, but he said the car hasn't moved that he's noticed since it arrived. Ellison glanced worriedly up at the 4th floor of the motel. Based on how he described the men, I think we just found the last 2 of Jarvis's workers. What's the room number? I could hear the barely restrained anger in my voice. I'd been trying to be patient, but I needed to get up there now and he was wasting time. He glanced back at me. I'm getting to that, but first you need to hear me. We're likely walking into a hostage situation with 2 homicidal maniacs and a trained armed officer with a monster in her brain. Best case scenario, I'm probably going to be fired. Worst case, most of us wind up dead or puppets for that damn thing. I'm not trying to be a hero here, but you need to follow my lead. Listen to what I tell you to do and stay out of my line of sight on them at all times. You clear? I nodded, and he patted me on the shoulder. Okay, let's go get your family back. They're in room 403. We went up the stairs slowly, looking around constantly for a nearby ambush or a distant threat, but there was nothing. If there was anyone else even staying at the massive motel, you couldn't tell it by what we saw as we ascended to the 4th floor. We reached 403, and I went to knock, but Ellison shook his head. He gently pushed me to one side of the door as he moved to the other. Once in position, he drew his gun and quietly tried the knob. The door opened easily into a well-lit room. On the bed was Sandra and the girls, their hands tied in front of them and pieces of ripped bedsheet tied across their mouths as gags. Standing on either side of them, like bodyguards, were the last two men from when the coffin was found. They were both caked with dirt and filthy, and I could tell from their clothes that they had recently urinated on themselves. As we stepped into the room, the smell of rotten meat and shit emanating from them made me gag. For their part, they barely even glanced at us as we entered, their eyes only ticking in our direction briefly as they continued their slack-faced manning of the post. Ellison gestured for me to stay back as he checked the small bathroom just inside the entry door. A moment later, he was back out and into the room proper. Looking around, he saw what I saw. No Deputy Minus. Holding his gun on the men, he edged around them to glance out at the small balcony that looked onto a distant clump of scrub pines. She wasn't hiding out there either. Then, I saw it. The Rock's back. I pointed to the room's television stand. A couple of inches in front of the TV was the smooth, flat stone. I had the crazy urge to pick it up, open the sliding glass door, and hurl it out into the woods. But I knew it would do no good. There was no stopping this, just containing it. I had to get it away from the others. Put your hands on your head and step to the front door. When you reach the outside of the door, get down on the ground. If you do anything else, I will shoot you. I looked up and saw Ellison was trying to get the workers out of the room. Sandra and the girls had been squealing with some mixture of joy and fear since we entered, but I'd been so lost in looking for Minus in finding the stone that it was only now that I thought to comfort them as best I could. It's okay. It'll be okay. You're safe now. I registered movement from the two men only a moment before the gun went off. They weren't heading for the front door or even to attack me or Ellison. They were charging the sliding glass door. They first hit it with a crash, even as the second was shot, but neither of them seemed to slow down. One more blow to the glass, and they were through. At first, I thought they were trying to escape, but they never slowed. Instead, they hit the waist-high railing hard, tearing it free as they tumbled over and past it before falling to the ground below. Ellison stepped out on the ruined balcony and looked down. Shit. I think they're dead or close to it. He glanced up at me. Get your girls free. I need to call this in now. I nodded and went to them, hugging them briefly before freeing their mouths and hands. They were all hugging me back, crying and asking if it was over. I lied to them and said it was. Hopefully it wasn't much of a lie. I planned to end it all. Soon. Pulling back, I focused on each of them for a moment, trying to burn their faces into my memory. I wanted something good to hold on to when I was alone in the dark with that thing. I love you all so much. I started to cry as I went on. I know I haven't always been a good person, and you always loved me in spite of my mistakes. There may be a lot of weird things you hear in the next few days, and I know you may never understand most of this. Heck, neither do I. But always know how much I love all three of you. You were always the best part of me. Not wanting to prolong it any further, I turned to grab the stone, intending on taking it back downstairs and driving it far away from here, find some secluded place to bury it, and me, hopefully, really, forever this time. But it was gone. Missing something, Papa? Christy was only 4 and still mumbled a lot when she talked, but this was loud and clear. The voice was hers and not hers. I felt my knees weakening as I heard its voice woven through. Want me to help you look for it?" I turned back and saw a knowing grin on my little girl's face as it mocked me. Sandra and Alice knew something was wrong. They were frowning at Christy, and after a moment Alice was sliding off the bed and coming closer to me. Sandra reached out to touch Christy's face, and I moved to stop her, but I was too late. Our baby girl launched herself past the outreached hand and bit down on Sandra's face. Blood sprayed against the wall as Alice joined her mother in screaming in terror. Ellison came back in from the balcony and dropped his phone when he saw what was happening. We both moved to pull Christy off, but she was impossibly strong. I was yelling, but I have no idea what. I was out of my mind with anger and fear, and as I watched, the thing in Christy was crawling up Sandra's face with its gnawing, questing mouth. It had started on her left cheek, but it quickly moved along its path of ruin to Sandra's eye. As it bit down on the interior of her eye socket, a wet crunching sound was met by Sandra's keen animal wail as she passed out. The goddamn thing was making her eat Sandra's eye. Anger flared brighter in my chest, and I planted my feet. Ellison, seeming to sense my intent, braced against the slumping Sandra as I yanked as hard as I could to pull Christy off of her, fearing it still wouldn't be enough. Except it was more than enough. Just as I pulled, Christy just let go. We stumbled and fell past the carpet, past the broken glass door, to the end of the broken balcony. For a moment, I stood on the edge, trying to tilt us back the other way, working against momentum and gravity and inevitability. And then we were floating through the air, and I could feel the deep rumble from my little girl's chest as we headed for the ground. It was laughing. It was over the next moment. Pain flared through my body, and I let out a scream of agony that turned to despair as I realized I wasn't that badly hurt. I had landed on Christy. Dragging myself off of her, I rubbed dirt and blood off her face as I tried to wake her, to wake it. "Ask me your question. I'll answer. One of her eyes fluttered open. The other one crushed closed and tangled in a mass of welling blood. Her good eye couldn't focus, but I knew she was searching for me. "Daddy?" She looked like she was going to say something else, but then she was gone. I screamed and cried, beating the ground and hitting myself over and over. My arm was broken, and the pain that tore through me with each blow seemed like the least of what I deserved. Why hadn't it taken me? Why hadn't it just asked its last question?
Because the questions were never the point, my boy.
Ellison was standing over me, and I saw now that Alice and Sandra were there too, forming a rough semicircle around me and the crushed horror of our baby girl.
I don't need the questions to take you. Never did,
Alice said as it smirked at me.
But I'm very old, and I get bored,
Sandra said.
It's more fun if I spice it up, and it's easier to take the special ones like you, my long-term host, if you have a bit of hope and a sprinkle of mystery to go with your terror and despair. Ways you can fight me,
Ellison said.
Rules that can protect you,
Alice added.
Some noble sacrifice you can make to atone for being the stupid little waste that you are.
Sandra's smile was thin and cold as she shoved me lightly with the toe of her shoe.
And what can I say? It makes you tastier, too. Unlike the others, I'll hold off a good long time before I eat you. But what can I say? I like to season my meat.
I had no response to give, and apparently it needed none. The world exploded as I suddenly felt an enormous pressure in my skull. I had the image of the rock appearing there, tearing and pressing at the brain tissue to make room. I knew that wasn't possible. I'd be dead or in a coma from something like that, but I somehow knew it was still true. It was like Emily described. I could feel it inside me now. Sandra, Alice, and Ellison all slumped to the ground like puppets with their strings cut, but when I checked them, they were alive. I didn't have any way of knowing if they would ever be okay again, but then again, nothing could ever be okay again. I looked down at my shirt, covered in my baby's blood, and I stripped it off before running from my car. The gravekeeper was quiet in its new home and didn't stir as I drove away from the motel in the nearby town. I went deeper into the country for nearly an hour, searching for what might be a good spot to hide my car. When I found it, I left my car, cell phone, and wallet behind, taking only a tire tool out of my trunk to use as a makeshift shovel. I walked for another 2 hours when I came upon what had likely once been some kind of large animal's burrow. It only took a bit more digging to make it large enough for me to fit inside and be out of sight. Not wanting to waste any time, I put Ellison's gun to my head and tried to pull the trigger. Except it wouldn't let me. I cursed, I screamed. I tried using both hands, but nothing I did worked. It just sat silent, letting me try and fail over and over again. Please, just let me die. Please, please, please. I knew I was growing hysterical, and I was fine with that. Maybe it couldn't prevent a natural death by stroke or heart attack as easily. I had to find a way to... This is it. It was a young man's voice. Yes, he's in there. I thought I was going to vomit half a mile back, but it is much stronger here. This was an older, deeper voice. I was trying to decide how best to stay hidden or escape when a strong hand suddenly shot into the burrow and pulled me out. Blinking, I looked up as a large old man squatted down quickly and injected me with something. Almost immediately, I felt blackness slipping in, but I still jerked when I heard the whir of an electric drill. I thought of Ellison's story and closed my eyes gratefully. Wait, this was the younger man again. I can sense something about this one too. You can. The older man sounded curious, but I still heard the drill drawing closer. Interesting, but no time to risk it. Not with this one. No. Stop. The young man spoke again. Don't drill him. He's different. It's different, I mean. I think it wants you to drill it. I don't think it's like the others. I think it is the seed in his head, or at least the seed is containing it somehow, limiting it. The electric drill came to a stop. How could you possibly know any of that? I opened my eyes again, and I could barely see anything. Everything was a blur, but I could hear the worry in the young man's voice. I don't know, but I do. It's like I remember it somehow. It's weird, but we can't deal with this thing like normal. The older man sighed. Well, then we'll have to... But then I fell into the black. I'm restrained in a small warehouse basement that the young man, Jason, told me they had planned to turn into new living quarters, but that this seemed a much more important use. They've told me what their plan is, and I can see now how much the idea of it pains them. They never apologize for it, but I can tell they wish there was another way. The older man, Dr. Barron, says they are letting me record this narrative, everything that happened from the beginning, both for their work and so that my story can be heard and remembered. I asked them how they found me, and they tell me that Ellison had called them when we were on the way to the motel. When I asked them why they weren't afraid that the gravekeeper might take them over or use me to hurt them, they share a glance before telling me that while there are always risks, they have some unique immunities to these kinds of things and are experienced with such matters. Dr. Barron lightly gripped my chin then, and it was clear he was no longer talking to me, but rather the thing nesting in my brain. Besides, I don't think it wants to fight us. I think it's exactly where it wants to be. I saw Jason's eyebrows go up behind him. What? Why do you say that? The doctor kept hold of me, looking into my eyes as though trying to peer through and behind them to the monster. Because from everything we've heard of this creature, it's very old and cunning, very good in getting its way. I felt a dull thrill of fear as his face hardened, and we may not know why yet, but we will. And when that day comes, the gravekeeper may learn it isn't quite as smart as it likes to think. I wish things had turned out differently. I'm scared of being alone with that thing, and my only hope is that the burial carries me beyond its ability to keep me alive. They tell me Ellison and Alice are okay, or as okay as they can be. They seem normal, at least. Sandra is alive, but still in serious condition. My family will never understand what really happened, but I think that may be for the best. As bad as not knowing might be, the truth is so much worse. I'm at the end now. Jason has stayed with me to record my story, and I hope he takes to heart what I say next. These men are good men, and I bear them no ill will. They're just doing a better job of what I already tried to do. Up above, I can hear the beeping noise of the cement truck as it approaches the edge of the subterranean room I'm in. I hope that it's enough. So listen to me before you go, Jason. Listen, whoever hears my story, keep me buried forever. Do not ever let the gravekeeper out again. Please, don't.
We both know that's not the way this'll play out, don't we, boy?
I turned off the recorder and looked down at where Mark Sullivan was chained on the floor. The voice coming out of him now was rough and hard on the ears.
We both know we'll be seeing each other again.
I thumbed the button to back the tape up to before the gravekeeper had spoken. Yeah, I suppose we do. Sweet dreams, you son of a bitch. Moving up the steps to the surface floor, I nodded to my grandfather's reflection in the side mirror of the truck. Looks good, Grandpa. With that, I started the flow of concrete into the room below. The thing down there was chuckling to itself, but soon the flow of liquid rock silenced it, and within 10 minutes it was done. I turned around at a hand on my shoulder and smiled at my grandfather sadly. I really hate this. He rubbed his mouth and puffed out a long breath. I know. I do too, but it's the best temporary solution we have. He glanced down at the slowly hardening concrete. Did he get to finish saying his piece? I nodded. My grandfather studied me a moment. Did the gravekeeper ever come out to talk? I hesitated, but I didn't forget who I was talking to. He most likely already knew the answer. At the end, just, "I'm going to get you, my pretty," bullshit. He shook his head. "Don't do that. We're right to be afraid of that thing. You were right when you realized it was different somehow. Even down there, we're not done with it. It's still very dangerous." I stuck the recorder in my pocket and suppressed a shudder as I stepped back from where Mark Sullivan and the gravekeeper lay entombed. Yeah, I know it is. The route between Greycastle and St. Joseph's Stand is, and always has been, empty. If anyone is left on the train by the time we reach Greycastle Station, they depart. No exceptions. No one gets on. It's as simple as that. Sometimes, on occasion, a couple of passengers board once we reach St. Joseph's Stand, but it's only a tiny little station, out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded, completely enclosed by gray-green fields and hills of wild grass. A ruined church watches silently over the trains that come and go. They're far and few between. The route lasts for about an hour. It takes us wildly off course, and it's always empty. Always. No one boards at Greycastle. No one departs at St. Joseph's Stand. I don't even know why we make the journey at all, to be perfectly frank. But we make it nonetheless. Twice a week, every week, we depart from the line that runs between the cities, and we head out deep into the countryside, and we let the stragglers off at Greycastle. Then, sometimes, if it's a particularly busy night, we'll let maybe a couple of new passengers on once we reach St. Joseph's Stand. But we never take any between the two. It's a ghost voyage. I've been a train conductor for 3 years now. It's an okay job, I suppose. I used to be an editor for TV. That was my real passion. I worked so hard to get into it. But I couldn't take the stress, if I'm being honest. For months on end, it was live show after live show. The editing has to be done the same day, ready to be broadcast the next. I let it overwhelm me, sadly. Train conducting, ticket collecting. It's not exciting, but it's relatively stress-free, so it makes for a nice change of pace, I guess. As always on this leg of the journey, it's quiet, peaceful. Late at night, with nothing to do, no passengers to collect tickets from, I usually sit myself down in one of the seats and stare at my phone. Every time we make this trip, every time we take the route between Greycastle and St. Joseph's Stand, I try and summon the courage to call my daughter. I haven't really had a proper conversation with her since the divorce. I just want to tell her I love her, ask her if she'd want to meet up. But I can't think of a way of doing it that doesn't sound weird, just me calling her up out of the blue. And so, I stare at my phone. Today is no exception. I bitterly continue my sad little tradition. The time drags on, and I always, without fail, eventually decide that it's gotten too late. I can always try again. Next time. Next time. Sometimes I read a book at this stage, or listen to a podcast. I've still got about 40 minutes to kill before we reach Greycastle. I stretch. I'm particularly tired tonight. Can't be falling asleep on the job. So I choose to stand instead, cracking my back and lifting my knees, encouraging the blood flow. I turn and amble my way through the empty carriage, stopping for a moment, resting on the headrest of a nearby seat to look out the window. Dark and sleeping hills, clusters of trees, low green mountains, they all roll steadily by. My eyes defocus, and I find myself looking at my own reflection. We regard each other for a long moment, then sigh as one, and I rub a hand over my tired eyes. I move on, pressing the button to open the sliding doors and stepping on into the next carriage. I come to an immediate stop. What the hell? There's a passenger in this carriage. I stare at the man. I can't believe it. There's a passenger, an actual passenger, sat alone in a section of seats made for four, two facing forwards, two facing backwards, with a table in between. He's looking out the window. I can scarcely believe what I'm seeing. This is massive. Wait till the lads hear about this. Even my own predecessor. He'd done this route for what, 5 years? He told me he hadn't seen a single passenger. Not one. Not ever on this particular route. And yet, here's a man, plain as day, on the very route, the route between Greycastle and St. Joseph's Stand. I chuckle and shake my head, amused at how I could find such a mundane and, in the grand scheme of things, really rather uneventful development on this train to be so exciting. I walk over to the man, reaching for my ticket stamper. He glances anxiously at me, twitches, and suddenly, just like that, my mood drops. Something about this man has put me on edge. I stop, and I look around the otherwise empty carriage. It's gloomy. A flickering light at the far end of the car made the hair-raising transition from irritating to downright unnerving. There is no sound, but for the soft, steady chuntering of the wheels against the steel tracks below. I look back down the aisle towards the man. He's fidgeting, sweating, a junkie perhaps. A part of me wants to just turn back. Maybe I should. It's one route that no one ever takes. Maybe he can't afford a ticket. Maybe I should just let him ride. But I have to know why he's on board. I just have to know. He must have a reason. No one is ever on board. Ever. So why him? Why now? And so, cautiously, I walk over to him. I clear my throat, surprised by my own sudden anxiety. I've never been a hugely confident man, but this was my job, for God's sake. Where has this ridiculous fear come from? Except it doesn't feel ridiculous. It feels urgent and immediate and pressing. And I wonder if I've made a terrible mistake here in this dark carriage. But it's too late. I've begun speaking. "Excuse me, sir. I say, the words coming out before I can stop them, an attempt at a good-natured tone. We don't get many passengers on this route. I was wondering if... I was going to ask him if he wouldn't mind sharing a little about his journey, but my voice catches in my throat. My mouth dries. The man, after a moment or two, responds to my words, and violently. He throws himself back up against the window with terror, sheer terror in his eyes, a hand clutching at the front of his jacket. I take a step back in alarm, and my eyes are drawn to something on the back of his hand. It's carved, a symbol, carved into his skin. I realize then that I have truly made a terrible mistake in the decision to engage with this man, but it's too late. The symbol looks like a capital R made of 4 straight lines, the curve of the R's top half replaced by a rough triangle. I look up into the man's eyes. They are stricken, pleading. He shakes his head, sweating. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to de-escalate. I don't know how to disengage or to calm him down. I'll think of 100 things I could or should have done in this moment in about an hour's time, but right now my mind is blank. So I do what I'm supposed to do. I follow procedure. I have a job here, after all. Keep this unfortunate encounter brief, professional, and I'll be on my way to the opposite bloody side of the train. May I see your ticket, sir? I ask, trying to sound neutral. The man freezes, tensed. I can see the veins in his head. In the back of his hand, contorted grotesquely around the carved R. We stare at each other in cold silence. And then, it shatters like ice. No! He screams, and I clench my jaw, retreating in panic as his hands fly to my head, rocking forwards and backwards. No! It's too soon, it's too soon! I haven't even been given a fair chance! I've barely begun! He shouts, his voice strained, banging his head against the window. Shaking, I reach down for my radio. The man looks wildly around at the ceiling, out the windows, his arms outstretched. Does this count? Has my journey begun? I begin to draw the radio up to my mouth, but the man looks directly at me, and I freeze. He glances down at the radio in confusion, looks me over properly for the first time, uncertainty contorting his fearful expression. He stands suddenly, with a quick smack knocking the radio from my hand to the floor. Are you even a real conductor at all? He hisses into my face. Are you part of the train? Are you human, conductor? I just stare back at him. I don't know what to say. The man sees my ticket stamper, takes real stock of my own expression, and he puts his head in his hands and starts to laugh. Great heaving bouts of laughter that shake his shoulders. You haven't a clue, have you? He screeches. You have no idea what I'm talking about. This is all too much. The lunatic is clearly on some serious shit. I glance down to the radio. Screw it. I'm just going to make a break for it to the engine at the front. I prepare, just for a second, shifting my weight, ready to run. But the man moves his hands from his face at just the wrong time, and he anticipates what I'm about to do. He jumps on me, and we stagger to the floor with a crash. Panic overtakes me. No, I cry out. Get off me. Let me go. Punching, pushing my fingers into his eyes, anything to get him off, but a furious grin is etched into his face. He pulls a knife from his pocket. And I tense up, flinch, withdraw my hand from his face with pure instinct, and use it to cover my neck. But he grabs my wrist, and with an elbow to keep me down, ignoring my cries for help, he begins to carve the same symbol on the back of his own hand into mine. You're insane! I shout into his face. I try to pry away his arm, try to push him back, but the aisle is narrow. He has his foot on a nearby chair. He's using all his weight to keep me down. The junkie's grin quivers. "I'll be damned if you end my journey before it's even begun," he says into my face, dragging the knife through the skin on the back of my hand, holding it as steady as he can in a painful vice-like grip, his knuckles turning white as I flail and heave to little avail. He completes the symbol, and he laughs, bitterly, exhausted, relenting, and it's enough. It's enough for me to force him away. I stagger to my feet, still in deep shock, clutching at my bleeding hand as it leaks down my forearm and drips onto the floor. The man just laughs. He laughs and laughs in the aisle, and I realize to my horror that the seats around me, the seats, they're full of people now, silent, staring, expressionless, and their eyes are all red. I swivel in horror, looking this way and that, but all of their eyes are red. Red, red, red. Not bloodshot, not red-colored, just deep, dark red. No iris, no pupil, just dark, wet, red stains. I stagger in horror, unable to even scream. The junkie only laughs. He slams his fist against a nearby chair as he rolls around on the floor. I turn, and I run. I push through the carriage door, looking this way and that in terror. Some of the chairs are still empty. Some are not. The ones that are not are all occupied by these terrible new passengers. Eyes of wet, blood red. Their skin, in fact. Even their skin looks reddish in hue. And their veins seem almost alive, writhing and throbbing slowly across the visible skin. "Hello?" I say to one with a shaky voice. "Can you hear me?" The passenger does not respond. He does not move or react in any way. I swivel again, horrified, turning to look at another. "Can you hear me, madam?" I put my good hand on her shoulder and recoil at once with disgust. Her shirt is damp. It leaves my skin stained, and I realize that I cannot see where the shirt ends and her skin begins. It's all roughly the same color. I can see veins on her clothes. I'm not sure if they're even clothes at all. "Good Christ!" I cry out, movement catching my eye, and I turn to look through the door windows and down into the previous carriage. The junkie has risen, and he strides through the aisle, coming straight towards me. I look around, panicked, for a weapon, for somewhere to hide. Anything. I stumble down the aisle, and my eyes meet those of a woman. A real woman, with real eyes, at least, and real clothes. Like the junkie, she sat in one of a group of 4 chairs, 2 facing forward, 2 facing back, a table in between. We stare at each other. With a slight incline of her head, she nods to the empty chair across from her. She flicks her eyes from me to the chair. I notice the back of her hand. The same symbol. The 4-lined R. I turn my head. I can still see through the dark window. The junkie is about to push his way through. I swivel back to the woman. She tilts her head slightly, ever so slightly, to the left. Her jaw is clenched tight, but she speaks, quietly, barely moving her lips or her teeth as she stares at me. "Sit down, conductor," she hisses. "If you value your life, you will do as I say. Sit down, conductor, and be silent." I turn and see the junkie angrily push through the sliding doors of the carriage, and sending up a silent prayer to whoever may be above, I slide into the seat and sit motionless, my heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline coursing through my body, my hand throbbing. I've put my trust in you, woman. I think to her as hard as I can. My life is in your hands. The junkie strides down the length of the carriage. I can hear his footsteps approach, and he grabs my shoulder. I flinch and make to cry out, but the woman's stare bores into me, willing me not to react, and so I fight my instincts, and I do not respond. I'm sweating, but I return my head to its original position, and I ignore him. I need to know, are you a real conductor? He shouts into my face. Did that count? Did you ask for proof of my journey? The woman opposite glares at him. She hisses, Sit down, you imbecile. Before it's too late, sit down. But he does not listen. He pulls out the blade, presses it up against my neck, shouts louder. Are you a conductor? Yes or no? A flicker of pity flashes across the woman's face. The engineers will have you, son, she whispers, sadly. And the junkie stops at this. He turns to her. We all stay there, frozen, for another long moment or two, when we hear the doors at the opposite side of the carriage clank open. The junkie recoils in terror. He lets go of my collar and he staggers backwards in horror at whatever it is that approaches. No, he screams. No, please, stay back. He brandishes the blade out in front of him in two shaking hands, but his resolve breaks, and he turns and runs back down the aisle. I'm not looking. I'm looking at the woman. But I see, out of the corner of my eyes, I see them. 3 white figures, glowing ever so slightly. They're thin, but they are large, and as they pass, I feel goosebumps ripple across my skin. My teeth begin to hurt, and I shake, remaining rigidly in place as I hear the figures follow the junkie through the doors at the back of the carriage. I hear them clank open. I hear the man's screams, and I hear them clank closed, muffling slightly his cries of terror. It goes on for a long and agonizing minute, until I can simply take no more. I make to stand, but the woman thrusts out her hand, grabs my wrist, and for a moment I relent. But I have to see. I have to know what they're doing to him. I pull my wrist from her grasp and sprint to the doors at the back of the carriage, carefully peering through the door window. The junkie is writhing on the floor. One of the pale figures is hunched over his back, the blade embedded precariously in the side of its head. The other 2 have their weight on his arms. They are long, these people. They are too long. Their bone structure does not seem to make complete sense. I slam a hand to my mouth in horror, stifling a cry of disgust as the face of the white figure on the junkie's back suddenly unfolds. White pincers, long and bug-like, burst from its face and bite into the back of the junkie's neck with a sickening crunch, one I can hear from all the way back here. The man screams, and with another crunch and a series of pops, the creature to his left has torn into his shoulder blade. It strikes again, and it has removed the arm. I have to force down a sudden rise of thick, hot bile in my throat, but I can't take my eyes away. I can't look away from this scene on the train. Free rider! The man screams, gargling on his blood. There's a free rider on this train. He's here too. The next carriage! His words become slurred. The figure with his severed arm stands to the side, holding onto it carefully as it leaks blood over the floor. And the others, one still with its pincers in the back of the man's neck, force him through the carriage into the room beyond, the luggage area, where people can board and depart the train. Before the automatic door on the far side has time to close, I see him struggle desperately, but with some effort the figures push him out of sight and off the train. I see his torn body fly past the window as the train hurtles into the night. I become aware for the first time that we are no longer surrounded by hills and fields. The moors that make up the country between Grey Castle and St. Joseph's Stand are nowhere to be seen. Beyond the windows are no fields, no hills, but instead a black and featureless desert. Rough, low, dark dunes as far as the eye can see. Weak gray lightning flickers in the distance. What the hell is this place? What happened to my train? This isn't right. None of this is right. Oh God. Oh shit. I glance back through the windows, and the three creatures are coming towards me. I lurch backwards, stumbling, and with no other plan in place, hastily crash back into my seat, shaking, surging, but the woman across urges silence with her expression. I try to stay quiet, though my breathing is shallow and loud in my ears. "Don't panic," she says. I heard him too. The engineers can't identify free riders themselves. You'll be fine. Just don't move. What? She jerks her head towards a sign above the opposite seats. I look up, trembling. The sign is repeated, printed across the top of the whole row, but it wasn't there before. I've never seen it before on any of our trains, but there it is, and it looks old. It's simple white text on a plain black background, no other logos, and it reads, "Passengers must show ticket when asked by a conductor. Foreign bodies will be removed. You will alert the engineers to any foreign bodies present in the train. You must ride with a ticket. Free riders will be recycled." But I'm a conductor. Am I a conductor or a free rider? Shut up, she hisses again, louder, as we hear the doors to the carriage slide open. I am shaking, but silent. I'm not even breathing. I'm holding my breath. We stare at each other, and nowhere else. The figures approach. I hear their heavy steps, and they come to a stop at our table. I can see them in my peripheral vision, glowing softly, glowing white, hunched, thin, their arms too long, their legs too damn long. They hover in our space, and I can't take it. I have to look. I have to look. Just a quick glance. My eyes shoot to the side, and they meet with those of one of the figures. His face is terrible. It is long, like an insect's, folded in on itself with those pincers, those terrible pincers hidden away, but ready to spring out at any moment. And the eyes, the creature's eyes, they're white, wide, incredibly wide. No eyelids, no damn eyelids. The skin around the eyeballs is cracked and dark, as if they've been shoved straight into its head, with the tiniest of black pupils in the center. Staring back into my own. You must ride with a ticket. Free riders will be recycled. The words, the commands, they run through my mind one after the other as the creature's gaze bores into mine. We stare at each other. I'm paralyzed. I can see the other two of them hovering by the table in my peripheral vision. I feel like screaming. I'm ready to recoil, to strike out, to do something, anything, at the instant this abomination makes a movement, but it does not. The other two turn with soft, sickening cracks and disappear down the carriage. After a moment, the creature in front of me slowly draws back, stands up straight, and does the same, turning, leaving, walking away on long legs. I hear the sound of the far door slide open. I hear the door slide closed. I wait. I wait as long as I can, and then I take in a deep, shuddering breath, my head falling into my hands. I try to calm myself down, to focus. Focus. I look out of the windows at the black, scorched desert beyond the tracks. It offers me no comfort. I turn back to the woman. She's still staring at me, silent, angry almost. What the hell is this place? What's going on? I whisper. Shut up, she replies. I grimace and glance back up to the sign, repeated over and over above the rows of seats. Passengers must show ticket when asked by a conductor. Foreign bodies will be removed. You will alert the engineers to any foreign bodies present in the train. You must ride with a ticket. Free riders will be recycled. What's a free rider? Are we free riders? She does not respond. I look at the sign again. What were those things? What were they doing on the train? Are they the engineers? How the hell are you so clueless? She hisses angrily, leaning forward towards me. You boarded the train, didn't you? Don't you know what you're doing? I stare back at her, starting to become angry myself. I didn't ask for any of this. Her eyes dart down to the symbol on my hand, and I wave it in her face, fresh blood dripping onto the table as I do. You referring to this, are you? That lunatic did this to me. He carved this into my hand 5 bloody minutes ago. What does it mean? Why do you have it too? The woman leans back in her chair, eyebrows raised, but some of the anger dissipates from her expression. She chews her tongue.
Ew.
Yes,
Don't do that.
she whispers to me eventually. Those things, they're the engineers. But they aren't smart. They won't bother you unless they have cause to believe you're a foreign body. I lift my cap and run a hand through my hair, the adrenaline wearing off and the pain in the back of my hand coming finally to the forefront. Am I a foreign body then? Or a free rider?
Yes.
The woman shrugs. As I said, they can't identify free riders themselves. And think about it. Do you have a ticket? I put out my hands. I shrug back at her. I guess not. Although, do you have a... Stop! She shouts suddenly, jumping to her feet and throwing herself back against the seat. Her sudden movement and the shriek in her voice makes me start, and my question catches on my tongue. She's breathing heavily, terror in her expression. She looks over my head and down to the other end of the carriage. She glances behind her up the aisle, and she shakily returns to her seat. Don't, she says, hushed but strained. Please don't ask me if I have a ticket. Why not? Why the hell not? What is going on? I ask bitterly, trying to keep my voice low, though my frustration is clear. She just points back to the sign above. Passengers must show ticket when asked by a conductor. You're clearly not supposed to be here, she says. But you are a conductor of sorts. I don't know if the rule applies to you, and I'm not going to be your guinea pig to find out. Ask this guy. She jerks her thumb to one of the silent passengers sat on the opposite side of the aisle. Reddish-hued, straight-backed, blood-eyed, unmoving. I'm not sure about this. Do you really think that's a good idea? I ask. You want answers, Don't you?
Oops.
Ask the asshole.
Yeah, I was gonna-
Nervously, I lean across the aisle, clearing my throat.
Ash the boy.
Excuse me, sir. May I see your ticket, please? For a moment, nothing happens. Then the red man starts to move. It's an alien,
What?
almost mechanical gesture, but he raises one of his arms, displays one of his hands to me. Embedded between his fingers, veined, a part of the figure's flesh, it would seem, is a ticket, stamped, connected to his skin, made of skin, in fact. But it's a ticket, all right. No doubt about it. I peer at it as close as I dare. There are no words on it, no letters, none that I recognize anyway. Just strange, small, broken shapes and half circles. The figure returns his arm to its original position, and I pull back, rubbing a hand across my jaw in anxious thought. The woman is on edge again, her expression now a mixture of pity and fear. I don't know what you are, conductor, or how you fit into this, but I'd like you to leave now. I'm sorry, but please just leave. I run my tongue over my top teeth. What do you mean, leave? Leave where? Where am I supposed to go?
Good point.
Are the engineers going to take me if I move? I lean forwards as I ask my last question, and the woman recoils, pressing herself up against the back of her seat, eyes wide. I'm sorry, she whispers. So I stand. I try to think of something to say to her, a thank you, or an accusation. Should I be angry she's effectively casting me away? She's given more questions than answers, really. But no, she did essentially save my life after all. Thank you, I whisper. Good luck. She gives me an awkward half smile, one that doesn't reach her eyes. Nervously, I set out down the carriage alone, back through the car in which I'd tangled with the junkie, stepping over thick, viscous puddles of blood as I do so. It reeks like metal, almost. I hold my breath as I reach down for my radio.
That's true.
I test it out, but receive only dead static in response. I slot it into my belt regardless, and push on through the door to my original carriage. Only, this isn't my original carriage. Not anymore. It looks different. The seats are all in the same places, but the emergency signs are all gone. The travel information. The screens all gone. When I'd first stood up. When I'd put away my phone. My phone. A light bulb goes off in my head, and I reach into my pocket eagerly, ready to call for help. But the screen is, of course, smashed to pieces. It's broken. I try the power button. I hold it down, but still, nothing.
Okay.
Damn it.
Well,
I pocket the shattered device and take in the surroundings of the carriage. Some of the seats are empty. Some are occupied by the strange red-hued passengers, unmoving, unblinking, perhaps even unbreathing. The only clue to their even being alive at all, the slow churning, throbbing veins that cover their skin, if it is skin. I shiver, looking once again out the train window.
what's this thing?
There's only desert, strange, black desert. Waves of low dunes far off into the distance, and silent gray lightning crackling against the horizon. I glance at the signs overhead. Passengers must show ticket when asked by a conductor. Foreign bodies will be removed. You will alert the engineers to any foreign bodies present in the train. You must ride with a ticket. Free riders will be recycled. Recycled? What the hell is that supposed to mean, recycled? Right. Screw this. It's time for answers. I'm going to get some answers, and I'm going to get home. If I see the engineers, I'll duck down into a seat. I can do this.
What's this?
I can do this.
Carpet, yes.
I march on while my courage is strong, down through the carriage and into the next towards the engine at the front. Only, it isn't there. There are just more carriages. Car after car. On it goes as I walk down aisle after aisle. On and on.
Okay.
Endless carriages. Many of the seats I pass are empty. Many contain the red strangers. I even come across another person. A human, I'm sure of it. A teenage lad. Same symbol carved into the back of his hand. I try to talk to him, but he won't engage. He doesn't even look at me. He turns when I try to meet his eye. I promise him I'm not going to hurt him, that I'm not going to ask for his ticket. But my mere mention of the word sent him whimpering, so reluctantly I leave him be and continue on along my way. Dark and gloomy carriage after dark and gloomy carriage. There are dim beam lights across the ceilings on the cars. In some, they're actually quite bright. In most, they are not. In a few, they only flicker, on and off, on and off. And occasionally, they do not work at all. I have to rely on the light that comes through the door windows at either end of the carriage. No farther signs of the engineers, but I am on edge. I'm expecting them constantly.
That's why.
After a long while, could have been 30 cars, could have been more. I see something new. A man sat by the window. Not a red stranger, nor a human, at least I don't think he is. He's shimmering, more of a solid silhouette than anything else. No discernible features, just the dark shape of a person, swirling between shades of deep purple and pure black, the low light reflecting off of him in strange and unnatural ways, like water, but thicker perhaps. I stare at him. "Hello?"
Bucket.
I say, drawing a little closer. The man, if it is a man, does not respond. He doesn't move. I have no idea what to say. I have no idea if he can hear me. "Do you know anything about this train?" I ask him quietly.
Yeah, I don't.
A long, thin shadow sweeps across the floor of the carriage, and I jump back in alarm, my fist raised, shaking. But there's nothing there. A second shadow sweeps across the floor, then a third and a fourth, slower this time. They're kind of like legs, insect legs, like the kind of shadows a spider makes as it crawls across a light bulb.
Ew.
The beam light above me flickers. I look up,
Look up.
and the creature on the ceiling lunges down towards my face. I don't get a chance to see much of the creature as it falls. Looks to be made of a similar material to the warped, shimmering man, like a crab almost, or a spider, the size of a large cat or bigger. I scream loud and shut my eyes tight, pushing the nightmarish thing away from my head with as much sudden force as I can muster, flinging it down the aisle as I stumble and fall backwards, hard onto the carriage floor, watching in horror and disgust as the creature flies through the air and lands on its back with a soft, wet crunch. It quickly rights itself and scuttles without pause back towards where I'm currently splayed on the floor. I shriek again and stagger to my feet, using the chairs to pull myself up. I stumble back, 1 step, 2 steps, as the crab spider approaches, and I turn and run back into the previous carriage. I can hear its many feet against the floor, scratching. It makes me feel sick. I look back and realize in dismay that the thing is right at my feet, hissing around my ankles, and I shout out at it, swear at it loudly, skidding to a halt and kicking it as hard and as far as I can. It flies through the air for a second time, but I don't wait to see where it lands. I take off down the carriage, running, panting. The train takes a gentle curve. I feel it as I run, and I look out the window. No longer going in a perfectly straight line, I can see some of the other carriages, and I get, for the first time, a humble introductory understanding of the sheer length of the train. Carriages. Carriage after carriage after carriage. As the train curves round, its end, if there is one, does not show itself. It just goes on and on and on, stretching back into the desert. I catch a flash of white through one of the carriage windows, 4 or 5 ahead of mine. Shit. It's the engineers. It has to be. I've been an idiot. I was too damn loud. I stop, trying to catch my breath in the middle of the aisle, looking around. I turn back. Is the creature still following me? It could well be. Can I get through the doors if they're closed? I don't know. But the engineers can, and they're heading this way. Gritting my teeth, I make a choice. I hastily sit myself down in a free seat next to a silent red passenger, facing back the way I ran from. I try to control my breathing, to level it, to become as quiet as possible, trying to sink into the chair. I hear the door to my carriage burst open and my heart thunders in my chest. I hold my breath, dead still. They're approaching fast. I hear them, and there are the engineers. 2 this time. Tall, terrible, glowing, and they run right on by. They don't pay me the slightest notice. Out they go through the opposite door, and I wait, counting to 10, and I breathe. I wait to see if any more are set to follow, and then climb out of my seat, creeping up to the door and peering through the little window. I can see the engineers at the far side of the carriage, scrabbling after something. The spider, the shimmering crab spider. It scuttles below the seats and up onto the walls. An engineer reaches its long arms out to grab it, but it isn't quick enough. His elbow strikes the back of a red passenger's head, but the passenger does not react. The insectoid creature scratches madly into the bag hold above the seats, disappears, reappears, crawls desperately down over the seats, and one of the engineers lowers itself onto all 4s, like a wolf, I guess. I don't know. More like a mantis, I suppose. And it juts forward, pincers exploding from its face, crunching into the spider's back. I can hear it screech from way back here. Its legs writhe madly as the engineer drags it to an emergency door in the side of the carriage, and the other engineer yanks it open. It tears off one of the spider's legs, and the screeching creature is thrown from the train and out into the desert beyond. I see it hurtle past the window, still writhing. I make a quick return to my seat and wait silently for the engineers to pass by, but they don't. After a while, I return cautiously to the aisle, looking again through the door window, but the engineers are nowhere to be seen. They must have headed off in the opposite direction, towards the front of the train. I return into the carriage with the shimmering man. So there are spiders above this train then. Crab spiders. Great. Another thing to look out for in this accursed place. I glance out the window into the realm beyond. The black dunes of the desert are giving way to low hills now, small cliffs of black stone. Something thick, trunk-like and enormous shoots past the window. Then, another. A little farther in the distance, a third appears. It is a trunk. The trunk of a colossal tree, like a redwood, only larger, and the wood is dark gray. Branchless, it extends up, far up into the night sky. If I press my face against the glass and look up, I can see the bottoms of the tree's leaves, or needles rather, like pine needles, white in color. The ground below the great tree is covered in these needles, graying against the black sand. More trunks start to shoot past, then more and more, dozens of them, and the black sand outside begins to disappear under the carpet of gray-white needles. The trees, like the dunes, stretch far off into the distance. I turn back to the scene in the carriage and ponder, with desperation, the shimmering man. He's different, unique. He may have some answers for me, if he can even speak, that is. And I am desperate. Hello. I try again, cautiously. Can you hear me, sir? No response. The strange lights seem to dance of their own accord across his featureless form. I gently put my hand on his shoulder, and it feels strange, like I'm getting pins and needles almost. I withdraw. How would you feel if I asked you for your ticket? I ask, cringing a little, waiting for the worst. But he doesn't respond. It does not respond. Maybe he's just like the others, like the red passengers. He's no help to me. But I ask anyway. Could I see your ticket, please? At first, nothing happens. I wait for his arm to raise or for him to recoil or something. But he does nothing. I sigh and am about to leave when the man begins to shake, twitching unnaturally. His chest bulges out, then his shoulder. I take a step back, jaw clenched, wondering if I've made another poor decision here in my quest for answers. My wonder is short-lived. The man writhes angrily. Then he splits, and he bursts. From scalp to waist, he bursts open, and he unfolds into 4, 5, 6 of those terrible crab-like creatures. Oh shit. I grunt in panic, though I have the good sense to keep my voice down this time. Staggering backwards, I kick one away and, trying to stifle my desire to swear and scream, run through the next door, into the little compartment between carriages. There's a fire extinguisher tucked into a small compartment in the corner. It's heavy as hell, far heavier than a fire extinguisher has any right to be, but I heave it up into my arms, waiting, sweating, and as the door to the little cabin slides shut, one of the scuttling abominations crawls through the gap. With an angry grunt of exertion, I bring the extinguisher down with a crash and a crunch. It splatters the spider with a screech, mashing it into the floor. One of the creature's legs twitches madly. I bring the extinguisher up again, and back down with all my might, smashing the creature into pulp by my feet. I feel the bile rise up again in my throat, but force it down, still staring at the twitching mush I've splattered across the floor. Breathing heavily, I drop the extinguisher against the wall with a clunk and wipe my forehead. I didn't shout. I kept my voice down, or I tried to, but it was still quite the commotion. Was it quiet enough to keep away the engineers? The sound of clattering and thumping, and a quick glance through the carriage door window answers my question. There are 4 of them now. 4 engineers, all staggering about the cabin, pincers darting out, tearing off pieces of seating as they scrabble after the spiders, all now starting to screech loudly. One of the engineers looks up. It looks right through the window and directly into my eyes. My heart jumps into my throat, and I release a low, involuntary moan. I'd forgotten how terrible their gaze was. Their wide, unblinking stares. It takes a step down the aisle towards me, and I push myself away from the door with force, turning and tearing open the door to one of the train's toilet cubicles, slamming it shut behind me, blood pumping. I lock it with a shaking hand and press my ear against the door, waiting, desperately, waiting. For a while, there's nothing but the distant screeching of the crab spiders. Those sounds eventually come to a stop. Then, there is more silence, more maddening silence, and I hear the door to the carriage slide open with a soft clank. I hear footsteps, many heavy footsteps. I hear them gather around the bathroom door. I hear the crack of their joints, and I hear a knock. I hold my breath, but my heart is loud, far too loud. They can hear it. I'm sure of it. I don't move, but the knock comes again, a little louder this time, a little slower. Knock, knock, knock. Please, please, just leave me alone. I just want to get home. That's all. I never wanted this. There is another terrible, aching pause. It's like I can sense the engineer's hand drawing back from the door, raising, like I can hear the air currents move around his fist as he brings it down, ready to knock for a third time. Louder, perhaps. More urgent. But a scream comes instead. A woman's scream. A young woman, by the sound of it. Muffled through the doors, but still quite clear. Clear enough. There is no third knock. Instead, I hear the terrible soft cracking of the engineers' bodies, their heavy, sudden footsteps. I hear them tear away and push through the door into the adjacent carriage. It's distant, but I hear a commotion, more screaming, desperate cries for help. It lasts for a minute or so, perhaps. Then the screams become louder again. They draw closer, and I hear the door to the little compartment between the carriages open. The screams become much clearer, closer. A young woman begging for help, begging for her life, and the cracks and crunches of the engineers. It sounds like she's being hauled, dragged. I can hear kicking. A fist or a foot, perhaps, slams against my bathroom door, and I jerk back in alarm, listening as she is dragged away down the carriages. I listen to those terrible screams disappear gradually off into the distance, and I sit myself down onto the toilet with my head in my hands. I'm a coward. I should have done something, tried to help her. And done what, exactly? Fight off a horde of engineers by yourself? You could have tried. They would have thrown you off the train. Or worse. Would they? Would they, though? I have no idea what the rules are here. Not really. Besides for that damn repeated sign in every bloody carriage. I wipe my eyes. I am a coward. I glance at my watch. Since departing Grey Castle, I've been on the train for over 2.5 hours. That didn't make any sense. The route between Grey Castle and St. Joseph's Stand was only about 60 minutes. But, of course, we aren't on a normal route. Not anymore. I have no idea where we are, or where we're going. But I've sat hiding in here for long enough. I open the door as quietly as I can and peer out into the zone. No engineers. Just a crushed creature, my fire extinguisher propped up against the wall, and a trail of blood leading through the doors on both sides. I swallow. I consider taking the extinguisher with me. I try to lift it again, and I can do so, but it's heavy. So heavy. Far heavier than any extinguisher I've ever held before. I look at the label, try to determine the extinguisher's contents, but there are no letters here. Just those strange lines, clumsily printed shapes, and small broken circles. I return it to its spot with a deep grunt, and unsure what else to do, I continue on along my path. The carriage that held the shimmering man is a bit of a wreck now. Purple-black stains are splattered across the windows, the baggage hold, over the floors, and several chairs now sport missing chunks and torn fabric. The silent red passengers seem unperturbed. I hurried through it, into the next carriage, then the next, and the next. Carriage after carriage. The great thick trees in the realm beyond became sparser. Through the windows I can see the ground starting to crack and break apart. Small pools of water of deep and dark blue shoot past, then larger pools, lakes. They are connected with streams, with rivers, fewer trees, more rock-lined bodies of water. And then the land comes to an end, and around the train is only water now. Deep, blue-black water, an ocean of it, stretching off into the horizon in both directions. The sky is still dark, but the lightning no longer crackles against the horizon. I watch in equal parts awe and terror as the silent lightning forms instead in the clouds above, crackling quickly round it goes in a circle, back to where it began, and then flashing away into nothingness. Every few seconds across the sky, there are glimmers of this strange circular lightning. It lights up the surface of the softly, almost imperceptibly churning dark water of the ocean below. I watch for a while, then I carry on along my way. A noise grows as I continue my journey. I'm cautious, but it sounds like wind. Louder it grows, louder and louder, until I push through the door to its source, and it becomes a roar in my ears. There's nothing I can do at first but gasp, gaping around in shock. The entire top half of the carriage is missing. The carriage ahead is whole and shields me from some of the rushing wind, but I can still feel it, strong in my face, against my ears. I pull down my cap a little tighter, taking a step forward. The carriage was not designed this way, clearly. Where the walls of the carriage ends, there is jagged metal, uneven, torn, broken. The floor is littered with shattered glass, broken pieces of metal, and bits of seat. There are seats here, but not as many as there should be. Some have been torn from their positions. There are no passengers in this carriage. The lack of roof or wall gives me a somewhat clearer picture of my surroundings. Looking over the edge, I can see we're on a narrow bridge of some kind, maybe only a meter or so above the ocean's surface, a couple of feet, perhaps, above the water. Still, all around me, there's only water. I look up into the sky. Thick, heavy clouds of black and dark gray churn and roll steadily against each other, into each other, grindingly, pushing against the night sky in conflicting directions. Every few seconds, there's that same strange circular lightning crackling around and disappearing in peculiar gray flashes, illuminating the edges of the slowly swirling clouds in the darkness above. A terrible sense of vertigo threatens to overcome me, and I force my gaze back down and ahead. And with jaw clenched, I stride on into the next, thankfully whole, carriage. Then the next, and the next, and the next. Eventually, a movement catches my eye through one of the door windows ahead. I stop, crouching, watching, cautiously. It appears to be an old man, a human, shuffling out of a toilet cubicle and back through the door to his carriage. Down the aisle he goes, then he stops and carefully grips hold of the edge of a chair, lowering himself into it and facing away from me. I chew my tongue, then I follow, pushing gently through the sliding doors. I clear my throat as I approach the old man. "Hello, excuse me." He starts with a grunt of dismay, turning to look at me, taking in my uniform, my face, my eyes. We regard each other in silence for a moment. "Hello?" I say again. "Good evening," the old man replies. Then, "Are you a conductor then, son?" I'm not sure how to reply. Of sorts.
Are you going to ask me for my ticket?
No, I say.
Not if you don't want me to.
The old man snorts, then seems to relax a little. He gestures to the seat opposite from him across the little table.
Care to join me? He says.
And I do. I take the seat. The old man closes his eyes briefly, muttering softly as he crosses himself with his fingers. I don't fail to notice the R symbol carved into the back of his hand.
Are you sure you don't mind talking like this?
I ask anxiously, checking down the aisle ahead and behind with furtive glances.
We're not being too loud.
The man shrugs.
As long as we keep our tones level and don't cause a scene, in my experience at least, I think we should be just fine. I bite on one of my thumbnails. In your experience, you say, sir. How long have you been riding this train then, exactly?
The old man scratches his chin and looks through the window at the water beyond.
Well, must be going on. Has it been 7, 8? Yes, 8. 6 years and 8 months by my count. It's been quite the journey.
I stare at him.
6 years. 6 years and 8 months.
I chuckle awkwardly, but the man does not laugh with me.
You're joking, right? You're telling me you've been riding for over 6 years. The old man nods. That's right, son. 6 years, 8 months, he says quietly. Yourself?
But, well, that depends on what you mean. My shift started at 9 this morning, but I've only been here since, well, for a few hours. I don't know what's going on. I don't know where we're going. I didn't ask for any of this. Some maniac carved this symbol into my hand, I say, trying to hold back my sudden rush of emotion.
Is this how I boarded? Is it this symbol?
The man listens patiently to my little rant, then he speaks softly.
That's right, lad. The symbol. You must ride with the symbol, carved clear and plain as day. And of course, one can only board between the twin stations, between Grey Castle and St. Joseph's Stand.
But that doesn't make any sense, I say to him. The route between Grey Castle and St. Joseph's Stand lasts for an hour, max, not 6 bloody years. It loops back towards Manchester, goes on through Newcastle. It's supposed to end in Edinburgh in a couple of hours' time. The man shakes his head sadly.
Manchester, Newcastle, Edinburgh. I do not know these places, conductor.
I tap a hand against my forehead, slowing my breathing. This man is kind and helpful. It'll do no use to get frustrated. But your accent, you're British, right? You must know these places. England, Scotland? But the old man just smiles sadly, and he slowly shakes his head once more.
I'm afraid that I do not recognize these names, my friend.
I drum my fingers softly against the table, looking out through the window as the train chunters softly and steadily along the tracks, and the dark, churning waters beyond stretch far off towards the horizon. The old man speaks again, his voice breaking through the clouds in my mind.
The train can take you between, lad. It can take you beyond. Far, far beyond.
Beyond where, sir?
Where are you going?
I ask. I don't understand. What journey could possibly warrant a distance that lasts for 6 years? The smile drops from his face, and he looks sadly out the window for a long and heavy moment. Then he sighs, and he reaches into his jacket. Fumbling around, he produces a picture of a young woman in her mid to late 20s, and he shows it to me. She's a good-looking lady, with a nice smile.
I won't bore you with the details. I'm not sure how much sense they would make to you anyway, conductor. But this is my daughter, a wonderful young lady. A bit of a nutcase, though.
He chuckles. then grimaces.
Obsessed with the occult. A dangerous business. Dangerous business indeed. Got involved with some sketchy folk and she disappeared. Vanished off the face of the planet. 20 years it's been. 26 if you include these long years on the train. Though between you and me, I'm not convinced they travel by at quite the same speed. The old man's expression darkens. I promised myself I'd do everything I could to find her. What sort of a father would I be if I didn't? Began my own research into the occult, the backward shadows, the other sides, twisted lines that run between the gaps. The old man clenches a trembling fist and lowers his voice. I will find her, conductor. I will see her again. And I've been searching for such a long time. The man rubs the knuckle of a finger across a watery eye, looking down at the table between us as he does so. This stage of my journey is soon coming to an end. I'm glad I had someone to talk to before moving on.
Moving on? I ask. What do you mean?
My stop, lad. My stop be coming up any time now.
I lean forward, my heart beating fast with anxiety and anticipation. Your stop? You mean the train? The train actually stops?
Well, of course. He chuckles now. Wouldn't be much of a train if it didn't stop now, would it?
No, I say, sitting back in thought. No, I suppose not. Stay a while, the man says, nonchalantly enough, but it's obvious how grateful he is for the companionship. I'm really rather grateful for it myself, so I smile, and I stay. As the train crosses over the ocean beyond, we quietly chat a little about our lives, what we do, about our families. He talks about his daughter, and I tell him about mine, about my fear to call her, about my divorce, about my general dissatisfaction for life. It all sounds rather pathetic when I express it out loud, but he is sympathetic. He does not talk much about his home. I try to ask him about where he's from exactly, about his place, his city, his town, but he will not give me a straight answer. Nor does he ask me about my home, and I get the sense that perhaps we're not supposed to, so I drop it. One thing I glean, though, is that whilst he did indeed board between Greycastle and St. Joseph's Stand, he seems to be under the impression that the two stations were stops within a single sprawling city, scarcely 10 minutes apart in a straight line. His words unsettle me, and perhaps he can tell because the subject changes to our own surroundings. I ask him about the engineers, for an insight, perhaps, into their terrible forms, their staring eyes, their purpose. I ask about the passengers, the shimmering man, about the crab spiders. The old man has seen plenty of engineers, though he knows very little about them. He's watched them throw dozens off the train. They always take a piece before they do, an arm or a leg, or worse. The shimmering man, too, and other, larger, more terrible shimmering shapes. He's seen the engineers force them out and into the unknown that rushes by beyond the train doors. Never the red passengers, though. The silent, thick-veined passengers with the blood-red eyes. They're always left well alone, never given even a second glance. He's seen the crab spiders. He's watched them scuttle across the ceiling, over seats in the darkness. He says they get more common the closer you get to the front of the train, but he's never been to the actual front of the train himself, and he has no real answers for me regarding the train's purpose or true nature. The sign above the chairs becomes the subject of our quiet conversation. Passengers must show ticket when asked by a conductor. Foreign bodies will be removed. You will alert the engineers to any foreign bodies present in the train. You must ride with a ticket. Free riders will be recycled. "What does it mean, sir?" I ask him.
Tell me.
"When it says recycled,
Yes, tell me.
what does that mean exactly?" "I do not know, conductor,
I do not know.
but it scares me. Being caught out as a free rider. And every time I look up at that sign, I'm reminded of my own burden of guilt."
Oh,
I ask him what he means, and he continues,
he has no ticket.
"I had a friend on this train
Oh,
several years ago now.
shit.
Met him in one of the carriages and we got to know each other. He was a good fellow, searching for something to fix his head." The old man tapped his temple. "Sound and critical thinking, you understand, but plagued with terrible nightmares. We were sitting together one uneventful day, chatting as we often did, and a conductor shimmered up the aisle, fresh out of nowhere. First time I'd seen one. Not a conductor like yourself, young man, but a true conductor. One of the train's own. A terrible-looking thing. And it asked my friend for his ticket. And of course, he could not provide." The old man looked suddenly much older then, old beyond his years. A deep and reflected sadness washes over me. The conductor hovered beside us for, well, couldn't have been longer than a minute. Then it went on down the aisle and disappeared. Never before then had my friend seen a conductor so close, and as I said, I'd never seen one at all. I've never been asked to show my ticket. So we just stewed in panic for a while, unsure what to do and how to proceed. Then, the engineers came. Last thing he said to me as they burst into the carriage. Last thing he said as he gripped my hand. He urged me to stay silent, to not give them any cause to throw me off. And they took him, grabbed him by the back of the neck, dragged him on down the carriage and out of sight. And I never saw him again. And I have to live with my indecision every day. There's little to do here but think on whether I made the right choice, whether I could have saved him somehow. But my daughter is the priority. She's the one I set out to find, conductor. And I will find her. I swear it. By all the gods man holds. I swear it. The old man crosses himself for his second time, quietly muttering some words under his breath. I process his story in silence for a while. A light flickers at the far end of the carriage. The wheels of the train grind and chunter along the steel of the tracks below. A shiver of deep alien fear passes through me, and I ask the old man if he knows how he's going to get home. "One journey at a time, my lad," he whispers, as a gentle voice crackles through the carriage out from an unseen intercom. "Now approaching Cahiers CD. Cahiers CD." Then it fades into a low hum and crackles into silence. "Ah, well, here we go then. This is me," the old man says, and he shakily rises to his feet. He's of small stature, and his voice is tired, weary, old. There's no doubt about it. But he does not seem an old or weary man now, as he stands before me, chin raised, jaw set, and fist clenched. A circle of the lightning in the sky beyond ripples powerful silver light across his features, and I see in his eyes a determination that sends a surge of sudden affinity, of powerful admiration rushing through my blood. I rise to my feet too, unbidden, and stand there awkwardly in his shade. What am I going to do now? Hug him? Hug this stranger who I've known for all of 20 minutes? Ask to exchange contact details? But the man grins at me, and he holds out his hand to shake. I take it. I walk with him into the zone between the carriages, the compartment with doors to the outside, as the train begins to decelerate, slowing steadily. A great and rocky island appears behind the door windows. An island of strange, dark and glassy stone. A scene that sends through me an icy river of dread. The crooked mountains extend high up into the sky, and the island is surrounded by small outcrops of broken, tumbled rock. The train chunters to a halt, and the intercom crackles. Cahiers CD. And the man pats me on the shoulder, and he presses the button for the door. It opens with a soft hiss, and he steps out onto the gray-black ground below the train, walking over the wet stones to the dark and sinister island of rock and glass beyond. The doors quietly close of their own accord. I watch through the windows as the man gets smaller and smaller into the distance, and after a while, the train begins once again to hiss, and it starts to move, continuing its journey. I watch the man vanish from my line of sight. I watch the sharp and towered edges of the mountainous island roll by. I watch its cliffs disappear down into the dark water. The outcrops become sparser and sparser. And then, there is once again only water. I process a strange, but very profound sense of loss as I look out at the lightning circling above the ocean. I glance up at the signs that run along the edge of the carriage, just below the ceiling. Passengers must show ticket when asked by a conductor. Foreign bodies will be removed. You will alert the engineers to any foreign bodies present in the train. You must ride with a ticket. Free riders will be recycled. And I continue on along my way. My journey through the train continues. I think this is my plan now. Find humans, engage with them if I'm able, learn as much as I can, and hope I can find enough clues to figure out a way home. Maybe if I'm lucky, I'll even find someone heading in my direction. For the next 3 hours, however, I see no one. No humans, that is. I pass plenty of the silent red passengers. I see more of the shimmering men. I even see another crab spider, crawling, scrabbling blindly across the ceiling. Cold panic rushes through me, but I stay stock still. I control my breathing, and it disappears into the overhead baggage hold. I don't stick around. I subsist off water from battered, half-finished plastic bottles I find lying around, beneath chairs and bins. I'm not sure where they came from, and the taste is not great, but it's fine. I try the water from the bathroom taps too. Sometimes it's okay, though more often than not it's soapy and makes me gag. Curiously, I do not find myself growing hungry, but I do get tired. I stop for rest in the seat of one of the more empty carriages and look out the window. A flickering beam light overhead allows me a few uninterrupted seconds of vision beyond the glass, before my view is momentarily blocked by a flash of my own tired, anxious, reflected face. The ocean is now peppered with rock, great slabs of it rising out from the depths. In the distance is a beach of pale gray sand that steadily approaches, stretching around in a wide arc. There are pillars of some kind on the land beyond, but it's too far away. I can't tell from here if they're structures or if they're natural formations. And then, the light above me goes dark. The hairs on my forearms rise. A low buzzing noise drones down the aisle of the carriage, and I turn my head just a little, teeth set, as an alien form, larger than that of a man and hovering above the ground, shimmers slowly past. It's a conductor, a true conductor. I know it. I'd asked the old man to describe one to me, and this thing fits the bill. It is terrible to look upon. Every fiber of my being wants to scream and run, a writhing mass of white-gray, several long, thin arms that end in what appear to be curved blades of flesh. No discernible, even remotely human characteristics at all. It comes to a stop right next to me, and the gears for my fight or flight grind faster. What do I do if this thing asks me for my ticket? Do I try to overpower it? To run? Yank open one of the emergency doors and take my chances with the world beyond? I glance hastily out the window. The train is hurtling across the surface of the water. Would I be killed if I were to jump into it at this speed? Certainly if I hit one of the rocks. Though, if I survived, could I swim to the beach? Could I make it that far? But what if there's something lurking in the water? All these thoughts and more race through my mind, but a voice from the entity in the aisle interrupts and rumbles around the carriage. A request. The conductor asks for proof of your journey's validity. And whilst the words send me through a jolt of panic, I force it down, because the conductor is not talking to me. I can see no mouth. I cannot even tell which way it's facing. But I know. I can't say how I know, but the conductor, thank the gods, is not talking to me. A red passenger across the aisle stirs. She slowly, awkwardly raises one arm, and attached to her hand through the skin of her fingers is her ticket. One of the conductor's writhing limbs stretches down to the ticket, and it stamps it with the same symbol as the one on the back of my own hand, the shape of the R, and it steams softly for a while from the mark. The passenger lowers her arm, and the conductor hovers on down the aisle, through the door to the next carriage. I control my breathing, summon my courage, and I follow. Keeping my distance, I watch it drift into the next carriage and ask another 2 red passengers for their tickets. It stamps them, then hovers slowly on into the following car. I keep watch, creeping behind it. Looking carefully through the window, I see the conductor come to a stop beside 3 humans. 3. And they're all sat together, with terrified, stricken expressions on their faces as the voice of the conductor rumbles round the walls. A request. The conductor asks for proof of your journey's validity. And there is silence. And one of the 3 people, a woman, starts to shake and to softly weep. The others remain stock still, horrified, and the conductor, after a minute, moves on. It does not go through the door to the next carriage. It just shimmers and disappears from sight. The weeping woman's body is racked with sobs, and she collapses forward onto the table with her head in her hands. The woman beside her has gone pale. She's staring down at her, and the man across has started slamming his fist against the window in frustration. I step into the carriage, and the man's voice becomes clear. We're so close. We're so damn close. Let's just make a break for it. Our stop's the next one. It can't be more than an hour away. Come on, let's just jump. We'll be killed, says the woman across from him, adjusting her glasses, her voice trembling as she squeezes the arm of the weeping woman to her left. I look behind me. I can see a group of engineers through the door windows, a few carriages back and heading this way. You guys need to decide, and fast, I say to the group, and they look up, noticing me for the first time. The man lets out a shout of rage, jumping to his feet between me and the women. He's not one of them. The woman with glasses shouts at him. Look at his hand. I glance behind me again. The engineers look to be about 2 carriages away. They're coming for you, I say urgently, stepping past the man and gripping the sobbing woman by the shoulder. For you, definitely. Maybe for all of you. You need to leave, please. Just take your chances with the world outside and go. Are you mad? The woman with glasses hisses at me. Do you have any idea where we are? The man beside me lowers his fist. He's right, he says, looking over my shoulder. We've come so far. It's time to leave. It's now or never. They're going to throw us out regardless. He turns to the women. Get up, he says. Get up! He grabs the crying woman by the shoulders and starts to drag her to the door. Oh, Christ! No! The other mutters, shaking as she rises to her feet to follow. I slop myself down into a nearby seat as calmly as I can, and a few seconds later the door to the carriage bursts open. I hear the heavy footsteps of the engineers approach. Get back! The man shouts at them as he yanks open an emergency door. The sound of the rushing wind, a sudden roar now, billowing round the carriage. Then he turns to the woman with the glasses, holds her face in his hands. Go. Please, just go. You idiot, she says through tears, pushing him back. Go first. Jump and I'll follow. But the man does not. The engineers sprint past me, and the man grabs the woman by the shoulders. Brace, he yells into her face, and with all his force, he pushes her out of the train and towards the water below. We are moving at such a speed that there is not even time to see her hit the surface. He moves to grab the other woman, but he's too late. The engineers are upon him. I watch, fist clenching and unclenching with guilt and desperate sympathy, as the man and woman struggle against the engineers. The man is doing his best against two of them as they drag him around the cabin, cracking their limbs on poles and rails as he bellows in anguish. The woman is set upon by only a single engineer at first, and to my surprise, she manages, through the strength of some hidden-away force, to shove it back towards the open door. The man staggers backwards against the engineer clutching his neck, and the weight of the party crashes into the engineer by the door, and the monster is pushed clumsily into the world beyond, pincers darting out as it falls but catching on nothing but air, falling from the train and disappearing out of sight. The woman tries to wrestle one of the remaining engineers off of the man, screaming, but she staggers back in horror as its pincers unfold from its face and crunch into the man's shoulder. He thrashes, shouting to the woman to jump, but she's unable. The second engineer darts behind her, clambering up the rail and the wall to take hold of her, locking her in place as she struggles. Blood gushes out onto the floor, across the engineer's legs and over the man's torso. The engineer holding the woman turns his head and darts out his own pincers, latching onto the man's side, tearing off a chunk of flesh with a sickening wet rip of a sound. The man shouts something unintelligible, and the engineer behind him, with its pincers still in his shoulder, braces itself against the rail and forces the man through the door, and throws him off the train. It draws the door closed with a loud bang, and the rush of the wind in my ears is silenced. I watch in horror, my heart hammering, as the engineers set off down the train. One of them holds the screaming woman tight in its grip. She flails, slamming her fist against the engineer's body again and again. She catches my eye. "Help me!" she screams. "Please help me!" I sink into my chair, panicked, but the engineers pay no mind. They drag her on towards the front of the carriage and through the doors into the next as she kicks and screams. And I think hard and I think fast. I try to draw strength from my palaver with the old man. I try to take hold of a secondhand burst of courage, and I stand. Shakily, I stand. And as if on someone else's legs, I march down the aisle. I'm going after her. I'm going to act. Passengers must show ticket when asked by a conductor. Foreign bodies will be removed. You will alert the engineers to any foreign bodies present in the train. You must ride with a ticket. Free riders will be recycled. I can only presume that the woman I now follow is going to be recycled, whatever horrors that may entail. She is a free rider, like the others, and she has been identified as such. I dart down the aisle, trying to remain as inconspicuous as I can. The woman has seen me follow, but the engineers have not. She screams and babbles, kicking and fighting, and I can only pray that she does not give away what I am trying to do in her panic. The engineers drag her down the aisle and through the carriage, and then the next. But then, before a compartment between carriages, they come to a sudden stop. I stumble over my feet, scrambling into a chair as quietly as possible, watching intently to see what they're going to do. I squint. One of the engineers is rubbing his thumb around the rim of the open door button instead of pressing it. He does this only once, in a rough circle, and the button starts to glow a soft red. He presses it, and the door opens. Except, the view beyond the door, it doesn't match the view that was visible through the window. I stare in shock as the engineers step through. I get only a few precious seconds to take in as much as I can. The walls are reddish pink, the floor looks wet, there's movement, and the woman screams, trying to grab hold of the door as she is taken through, but it closes behind her with a hiss, and she's gone. The view through the door window shows only the next carriage. I stare, in alarm and disbelief, but I rise to my feet and hasten over. I look through the door window, no sign of the woman, or the engineers. I press the button, and the door opens. It's just the next carriage. A few of the seats are occupied by the red passengers. I wait for the door to close by itself, then I look down at the button. All right, screw it. Fortune favors the brave, right? Come on, you got this. I try to replicate what the engineer did. I trace my thumb around the edge in a rough circle, and sure enough, the button starts to glow a faint red. I take a deep breath, and I press it, and the door opens. I step through. The view beyond the carriage windows is broadly the same, though the beach is much closer now. It's the walls, the actual body of the train itself, that draws my attention now. They are indeed a deep reddish pink, and the floor is soaked, dark, damp, sticky. The light in here is red too. It's like being in one of those dark rooms they use for developing photographs. It's humid. The air feels thick, heavy. I can hear my own breathing. I take a cautious step into the carriage. All of the seats in here are occupied, most with the red passengers, some with the void-like shimmering men. A faint glowing white beyond the carriage door window at the far end of the aisle tells me that the engineers are still close by. I stride down the length of the car, holding tight to as much confidence as I can, trying to come up with some kind of a plan on the fly. Should I try to take the engineers by surprise? Use my semiconductor status to try and trick them? I mull over the options desperately as I walk the aisle. I try not to pay attention to how the walls seem to be quivering, gently contracting, in and out, throbbing almost. I follow on into the next carriage. The deep reddish pink walls of the carriage give way in some places to long, pale, thin arcs, squished up and between the wall's strange material, structural support beams of some kind perhaps. They look white in color, though it's hard to be sure given the strange lighting. I pass through the next carriage, and the next. More and more of the red passengers are replaced with the shimmering men. One of these men, to my horror, appears like less of a man and more like a lobster, perhaps. Enormous, alien, yet silent. I pass on by, teeth clenched. It becomes clear as they become easier and easier to see that the structural support beams, they aren't beams at all, not like any I've ever seen. They look like bones, arced up toward the ceiling, like great ribs pressed, squeezed tight between the throbbing, leaking walls of the train. It's horrific. It makes me feel sick. And the air grows thicker. The soft white glow through the train doors ahead, the the one that I've been following at a steady distance, suddenly becomes brighter, then brighter still, and the forms of engineers start to become visible. Shit, there's a group of them heading toward me. I look around helplessly. There are no free seats in this part of the train. There's nowhere at all for me to sit down. Trying to remain calm, I take a few cautious steps back through the door I just come through, and into the compartments between carriages. I look around for a bathroom to hide in, but there's none, nor is there even a fire extinguisher or anything I can arm myself with. So, with my options limited, I decide to just head to the corner and stand still. Totally still, heart pounding by the wall, looking at the floor as the door bursts open. 4 or 5 engineers run past, elbows out, hunched forward, most paying me no mind. But one of them slows down. It pauses and looks me over. I can see its wide, terrible, and unnatural eyes scanning me in my peripheral vision, but I do not stir. And thankfully, after a terrible moment of uncertainty, the engineer turns and carries on along its way. And after a deep breath, I carry on along mine. I can no longer see the engineers up ahead, but I follow down the aisles and through the dark and damp carriages regardless. The windows grow smaller with each new car. Eventually, the windows are lost altogether. One of the carriages, I find to my dismay, is occupied with no seats or passengers of any kind at all, but rather with 2 great, throbbing, loudly thumping, steadily shifting mounds of flesh, organ-like. I have to push between them to get through the aisle, and they feel damp and hot against my skin. It's revolting, but I keep pushing forwards. I don't know what else to do. I can see more engineers up ahead, though they aren't coming this way. Flashes of glowing white through the door windows, 3 carriages away. Then 2. And then 1. This carriage is, like all of the previous carriages I'd walked through, fully occupied. But there's only a handful of red passengers in here now. The majority of the seats are occupied by the dark, shimmering men, and they are large in this carriage. Oversized, bloated, only vaguely human-like, with their strange colors and half-lights wavering across their unnatural, featureless forms. I crouch behind the train door and peek through the window. The scene beyond is a nightmare, the worst I've ever laid eyes upon, on board or otherwise. I slam a hand to my mouth, staring, shaking, scarcely able to comprehend the grisly picture behind the window. This could well be the front of the train, the engine. I cannot see a door on the other side at least. The carriage beyond it is twice the height of any of the previous. It throbs, blood red. Dark stains and strange liquids ooze down its bulging walls and over the floor. A few meters ahead, I can see 2 humans, immobilized somehow, pressed awkwardly up against the wall, struggling. One of them is the woman I've been following. There are 6 engineers in here. One of them is holding something. I gag as I realize it's a human arm, messily severed. I watch as it throws the arm towards the central feature of the carriage, or perhaps engine. The terrible centerpiece in question is an enormous, gaping, wet mouth built into the body of the train, colossal, vibrating nerves and tendons and grotesque, stretched red skin connecting it to the walls, ceiling, and floor, lined all the way around its edge with grinding, crunching, scarlet-stained teeth. It moans, a strangled noise like the sound of an old engine, and mashes the arm to pulp in seconds, leaking dark liquid over the floor. I watch in abject horror as 2 of the engineers grab the human to the right of the woman, a young man, and hurl him without a second thought into the mouth. I flinch, squeeze my eyes tightly shut, but I'm too late, really. I see enough. The hungrily, desperately biting, chewing, monstrous mouth of the train, mashing the screaming man into red waste. I force down another rise of bile, shaking, my stomach lurching bitterly. Good God, what chance do I have? An incompetent, pathetic wretch of a man like me. How can I possibly hope to save this woman? For God's sake, I mutter to myself, running a hand through my hair, desperately trying to think. I glance behind me, and directly into the wide and staring eyes of an engineer. I stare into the engineer's eyes, and he presses suddenly forwards. The pincers tucked tightly into his face begin to tremble. I scream, staggering backwards into the engine room. "Conductor!" A breathless cry from my right, from the woman, held tight and drawn away from the wall, her arms locked behind her back by an engineer. I look all around me wildly, slipping on the dark-stained floor. Engineers scramble away from the walls, clicking furiously, cracking. One of them locks itself around my right arm from behind. The great mouth wails hungrily. Act. It's time to act. Now. Act now. I relent, ever so slightly, giving in to the engineer, moving backwards with it. Then I push hard, throwing it off, though not completely. I still feel its sharp grip scrape down the side of my arm, tearing my jacket, and I lurch forward, slamming into the engineer in front of me and sending him staggering backwards, half falling into the previous carriage. I take in a deep breath, raising my head up high, and I shout as loud and as clear as I can down into the carriage with the full force of my lungs. "Attention, all passengers. I, a legitimate conductor aboard this train, demand proof for the validity of your journeys. Every one of you, show me your tickets. Show them now." I feel a heavy pair of pincers tear into my shoulder blade from behind, and I gasp out in shock. No breath left for a scream, and it drags me back into the engine room. For a terrible moment, nothing in the carriage beyond seems to stir. And then there is chaos. The red passengers, few as they are, dutifully lift their arms to reveal their tickets, but the shimmering men, bloated, inhuman, shifting and trembling, they burst, almost as one, into dozens upon dozens of disgusting, crawling, shimmering spider crabs, some large, some small, some more lobster-like than crab-like, but screeching and clamoring around the carriage all the same. Some burst through the door into the engine room, and I feel the pincers